Every week we come here to talk about sensational stories, great cars, great victories, the best overtakes. 100 pole positions for Lewis Hamilton, 7 championships for Scheckter. I don't know how many consecutive titles for Mercedes, for Red Bull, for Ferrari. Who has the most fastest lap? Who was the best? Could Ayrton Senna be the fastest driver in history of all time? Or would it be Juan Manuel Fangio, who won 5 out of 7 full championships he competed in and was runner-up in 2 more? Always the best, the most incredible, great records and so on. But there are stories that Formula One would rather you never knew about, and if you did, that you would forget them. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today on Splash and Go. About 10 stories that were swept under the rug. Of course, all these stories are known. If you do a bit of digging, you'll find them. But interestingly, you also won't see the official Formula One channel talking about this. Why is that? Because they think there are better things to talk about, rather than reminding you of these not so pretty moments in history. Forget about that crap, mate. In 2012, the Spanish driver Maria de Villeta was set to do a straight-line test for the Marussia team. Straight-line tests were very common in the past to measure aerodynamics, usually carried out on long straights of circuits or on tracks at airfields, small airports, to measure wings, floor, and so on, to calculate drag and those sorts of things, without the expense of closing off a racetrack, and so on. These days, as we know, private testing is banned, but what would have been a dream day for the Spanish driver ended up turning into a nightmare and would cost her life. She had already done a few runs, carried out some experiments, and when she returned to the area where the mechanics were, out of nowhere, unexpectedly, her car suddenly accelerated and crashed into the back of a team lorry. The direct impact to her helmet at eye level was devastating, and she lost one of her eyes. She survived the accident, however, and quickly became a symbol of resilience and love for her profession. But a year later, she was found dead in a hotel room, and the cause: neurological injuries still resulting from the accident. A tragedy, a very sad moment, and it wasn't that long ago that it happened, which clearly exposed safety failures, especially when tests are not conducted on racetrack. The death of Riccardo Paletti, unlike the case with Maria de Villeta, was televised. It was the 1982 Canadian Grand Prix, and 1982 was a season comparable only to 1994 in terms of the heavy atmosphere that surrounded everything. It was the Italians' second appearance in Formula One, and when the green light comes on, the Ferrari of the Frenchman Didier Pironi stalls in the middle of the grid. Everyone manages to swerve. Paletti crashes straight into the back at over 200 km/h. This is perfectly possible to happen, and can and does still happen today. It wouldn't be problem. Problem was the quality of the rescue. Trapped in the wreckage, Paletti was being attended to in a slow and disorganized rescue when, tragedy of tragedies, everything was caught on video. A spark set fire to the car, which was leaking fuel. Just seconds before, you could see Pironi himself holding a fire extinguisher next to the car. Paletti is removed. He was taken to hospital, did not survive his injuries. By the way, if you're curious about how rescue procedures and medical care have evolved in Formula One, I've already made a video explaining it and crediting Professor Sid Watkins for the entire rise in safety up to today in Formula One. He left us a few years ago, but all the lessons remain. The drivers, the mechanics, the teams, we all know, are the main players in this show. But at every race, and I really need to make a video about this, hundreds of volunteer marshals, who don't earn a penny, are essential for the event to take place. And not just in Formula One. Any category, any track day, any safe and serious event involving cars, it doesn't even have to be a race. At a racetrack, there are stewards and marshals working, and they're the ones closest to the action, interacting with the cars on the track. That's why access is so tight controlled. And even so, with all the safety lessons learned over the decades, sometimes it's still the marshals who end up paying the price. But these stories are rarely told. At Monza in 2000, on the first lap, the Italian marshal Paolo Gislimberti lost his life after being struck by a flying wheel following an accident at the variant della Roggia up there. In 2001, Albert Park in Australia, that same corner where Fernando Alonso hit Gutierrez from behind in 2016, a life was lost. Graham Bever was killed by a tyre that flew over and struck him on the other side of the fence. And in 2013, Maria Robinson lost her life at the Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal when she was hit by a tractor that was removing a car. 3 marshals, 3 stories, 3 deaths that are very rarely told, showing that Formula One and motorsport in general don't always affect those who are 100% kitted out to withstand the impact. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the death rate in Formula One was on a par with that of combat aviation. It was common that, in a photo taken at the start of the year, when compared to one at the end of the season, at least 20% of the grid would no longer be there. Some were seriously injured, others had passed away. Serious accidents were common, but there was one that shocked Formula One and stunned a 3-time world champion, Jackie Stewart, cutting his career short. It was the 1973 United States Grand Prix, and the Frenchman François Severt, protégé of Stuart Tyrrell, suffered a terrible accident during practice, where a guardrail acted like a blade, slicing the car in half. The scene was so brutal, Stewart decided to leave Formula One right there, on that day and at that very moment. And they say that George Scheckter, who would go on to become Formula One world champion in '79, and who up until then had been quite a difficult, reckless, and dangerous driver, changed his mindset instantly. He was the first to arrive at the scene of the accident. Formula One lost, right there and then, 3-time world champion, a rising star, considered by many to be the most handsome driver ever to race in Formula One, all because of a glaring safety failure with a device that was supposed to help prevent, or at least reduce, the risks in accidents. This story sounds like the plot of a film, a spy thriller, or a mafia movie. In 1992, the Larus Formula One team was founded by Jean-Raoul Larus, former Renault factory team manager. I was on tenterhooks, like many of the little girls back then, in need of money. The salvation was the arrival of a somewhat obscure German investor, named, at least that's what they thought, Rainer Walldorf. Rainer Walldorf. Problem is that Rainer Walldorf didn't exist. His real name was Klaus Walldorf, professional killer wanted by Interpol for at least 4 years. For a brief period. Then, Formula One team was sponsored by a guy with bloody crimes on his record. Walldorf, or Waltz, ended up being found by the German police and took his own life after a shootout and a siege that lasted 9 hours. That's a lot of ammo, isn't it? Yet another stain that Formula One's Instagram and YouTube will never post or comment on. Between 2007 and 2008, Formula One was going through a fairly turbulent period. The teams owned by major manufacturers Ferrari, BMW, McLaren, which was partnered with Mercedes, Toyota, Honda, and so on, were planning to create an alternative Formula One. They even came up with a name, GPWC, or Grand Prix World Championship, since the name Formula One belongs to Fiat. Bernie Ecclestone was against it. Of course, losing losing that would mean losing his golden goose. He had the support of the then FIA president, Max Mosley, who had always been his right-hand man. Or perhaps Bernie was Max's right-hand man. The roles were often blurred. And then, in the midst of all this, coincidentally or not, photos and videos leak of Mosley taking part in an orgy in the company of young ladies wearing a uniform. I'm not going to say that word here on YouTube. That's right, Max Mosley sued the newspaper and won in court, claiming invasion of privacy, damage to his image, and so on. Problem with this is that once something is made public, there's no way to make it private. And you also can't forget that Max Mosley's father, back in the 1930s and 40s, was the leader of the British Fascist Party. That's right, which makes the story of the orgy with the girls dangerously coincidental with his origins. Now, come on! Isn't the best part of an orgy being naked? So why wear a uniform on top of that? That uniform? No, mostly. No, that's not how it goes. Yes. For more than 40 years, Bernie Ecclestone ruled Formula One with an iron fist and was largely responsible for making it the giant it is today. I've already talked a lot about his career in this video here about Formula One's money. I recommend you watch it. Because of that, he made a lot of money and, to this day, has one of the 3 largest fortunes in the United Kingdom. But in 2014, his empire almost collapsed. He was accused of paying $44 million in bribes to a German banker who helped with the corp maneuvering. This was essential for Bernie to sell shares in Formula One, and even so, he managed to stay in charge of everything. The accusation was extremely serious and could have led to years in prison, with a last-minute maneuver and spending a fortune, obviously, on excellent lawyers. Ecclestone struck a deal with the German state of Bavaria, paying a fine of $100 million, and, in return, the case was closed. At the end of the 1980s, in Formula One, pre-season testing took place here in Brazil 4 weeks on end at the 𝘾𝙤𝙥𝙮𝙧 in Rio de Janeiro. This was to escape the cold in Europe and to run in better weather conditions. To prepare for the conditions they would face throughout the championship, they left the European winter behind and headed to warmer places like here in Brazil. And then, during one of these tests, French driver racing for AGS, Philippe Streiff, suffered a terrible accident. The suspension broke on one of the fastest corners at 𝘾𝙤𝙥𝙮, and the car flipped over in the runoff area. The roll bar collapsed. As a result, he suffered serious injuries to his vertebrae and neck. What made the situation worse was the appalling quality of the rescue. His extraction from the car was poorly handled. The transport to the hospital was dreadful. There wasn't a specialist on call at the hospital where he was taken. The specialist was actually here in Sao Paulo and had to catch a flight back to Rio. So, this combination of factors, the roll bar that collapsed, the slow and poor rescue, a specialist who took ages to arrive, in an ambulance that, according to report, went down a cobblestone street. And the result was that Stray ended up paraplegic. Since it happened during a pre-season, far from everyone's eyes, a lot of people quickly forgot about this accident. In fact, it was the last straw that led to Rio de Janeiro losing Formula One, and Formula One almost left Brazil if it weren't for the mayor of Sao Paulo, Luiza Erundina, agreeing to renovate Interlagos. In record time, I've already told this story in this video here, taking on the responsibility and holding back Bernie Ecclestone, who was absolute furious. The driver would live until 2022, when he passed away at the age of 67. Also, in the 1973 season, when he lost his life, François Severt, another horrific accident at Zandvoort. Even before Watkins Glen, he had already drawn the world's attention. All eyes on Formula One for the worst possible reasons. During the race, Williamson's car crashes and flips over. He didn't die on impact. He was conscious and screaming for help. Another driver then stopped to help, David Purley. He then tried on his own to right the car, which was on fire. fire, and the rescue ended up taking longer to arrive because from the tower there at Zandvoort, the race directions saw someone walking beside the car and assumed everything was fine. They thought the guy had already got out. There was no urgency to send the rescue team, let alone the fire brigade, just to show you how things were back then. Hurley stayed there trying to right the car, and Williamson burned to death in the end. All of this happened in front of a rescue team that was poorly equipped and poorly trained, who basically did nothing. Awful, sad, a complete mess. In the intense atmosphere of South Africa in 1977, the Italian Renzo Zorzi pulled his car over to the side of the track with the beginnings of a fire. Two marshals carrying fire extinguishers then decided to cross the track without authorization from race control. First marshal manages to get across, but the second, a 19-year-old named Janssen van Vuren, is hit by a Formula One car traveling at 270 kilometers per hour. Van Vuren dies instantly, disintegrating in the air, and the driver of the car, Tom Price, is struck directly on the head by the fire extinguisher. He loses his helmet. He dies instantly and remains upright, still traveling at full speed, only coming to a stop much later at the barrier. Crashing into another car before finally stopping, a procedural failure, a safety failure, and a tremendous stroke, bad luck as well. In short, pure horror. Perhaps the most terrible scene Formula One has ever produced in its entire history. And we are not going to show it here. Have some respect for good taste, for common sense, for your own eyes. These stories are wounds. They are scars. They don't appear in documentaries. They don't show up in posts about the best moments. Naturally, because these are the worst moments. But since so many people have started watching Formula One in the last 5 years, I think it's fair. I think it's right that we also tell these stories. After all, the whole of Formula One is made up of winners, losers, record failures, and also stories, terrible ones. So that was another episode of Splash and Go on YouTube, bringing you stories that Formula One doesn't like to remember. Leave a like, it's free, doesn't cost anything. You know it helps a lot. Do us a favor, help out the channel and boost our video distribution on YouTube by leaving a comment, anything at all. Did you know about these stories? Did you know all of them? If I left out any particularly grim ones, or you don't want to say anything, just drop a little emoji. Tell us where you're watching from, anything in the comments box. It helps the video reach even further. Our community is incredibly powerful and makes a difference. Our engagement is higher than channels 10 or 15 times as many subscribers. To make you don't miss what we do, we have notification channels Instagram, Telegram, and WhatsApp with over 2,000 members in each, getting an automatic push notification on their phones as soon as I publish. Content goes. Last but not least, follow us on our social media, Instagram, Twitter, Threads, and TikTok. The handles and links are showing up here. You know the drill. They're down below in the description. Cheers, see you in the next video, and a big hug.